My name is Kazuhiro Nakai. I'm a chair of the BWC MX2 this year. I'm very much welcoming all of you who are coming to take part in this webinar. Allow me to do housekeeping issue once again. 2 points. First one is the microphone. Please make sure the microphone is turned off or mute. As there are more than 100 participants, this is of particular importance in order to keep the audio clear and fine. Second one is the questions in Q&A sessions. After the presentation of panelists, we are going to have some Q&A sessions. Those who would like to raise questions, please send it to the chat functions. Through chat functions, you can raise hand, but since there are so many, it is much more useful to get your questions through chat functions. That's it. Thank you very much for your attention. Now allow me to have the brief opening remark as a moderator. In order to facilitate the good discussion of the incoming MX meeting, BWC bureaus has decided to organize a webinar prior to MX meetings. We are going to have 5 webinars on each MX, and I'm very honored to organize and chair the first such webinars in this series. The webinar consists of 2 parts. The first is the video presentation, which is uploaded from Monday, and the panel discussion today. I presume many of you have already viewed a video presentation by Dr. Roger Rojas, who sets very nice scenes for the coming discussion of MX on science and technological development. Dr. Rojas touched upon the biotechnical boom in human genomics and others, and raised some concerns about its dual nature, and suggested some practical suggestions, provided concrete suggestions on how to manage such risks, which includes to synchronize the BWC work with other international agreements, to consider the scientific community as an ally, to embrace biocommunity, and to enhance the public awareness. You may find that all those points are well discussed in the intersessional period, and her presentation helps us very much to remember and reflect what we have discussed, which helps the coming discussion more focused. Therefore, I do appreciate the contribution of Dr. Roas. Dr. Roas, if you are here, thank you very much. In its wake, let me briefly summarize what we have discussed in the science technological development since the last review conference. During the intersessional period, we have discussed and recognized the rapid scientific and technological development, especially breakthrough in microbiology, that brings lots of benefits in medical, pharmaceutical, industrial, and agriculture fields. We addressed various technologies such as synthetic biology, genome editing, gene-derived techniques, and metabolic engineering in our deliberations. At the same time, we also noted the dual-use nature of such technology, which raised serious concerns on the potential and malicious misuse in violation of BWC. In this context, a sizable amount of time is dedicated to our discussions to regulatory and ethical issues associated with the risk and potential threat represented by such new technologies. The unintended effects of technology were also pointed out as an area of potential risk, as well as activities of a large number of amateur biologists that have no governmental, academic, or private sector affiliation, and therefore work outside any of the regulatory official regulations. In the MX2, we discussed how to strike the right balance between ethics and scientific freedom, in a context in which innovative technology are being developed outside the reach of current regulations. Notwithstanding the existence of national and professional code of conduct or similar institute as ethics guidelines, many spoke in favor of the need for voluntary code of conduct and described and introduced their national example. Similarly, various members stressed the importance of promoting broad culture of responsibility and giving emphasis to education to complement code of conduct. We also engaged in discussions on the science and technology review process in the conventional framework to monitor such development and assess their potential implications. Several very good and practical suggestions, proposals were made in this, on this issue. These summations shows that we have already built upon very good discussions in science and technological development in relation with BWC. Now, I am of a view that what we should do is to explore tangible and concrete outcome based upon this discussion in the coming review conference. Fortunately, we have more than several good proposals on each MX agendas that can be basis for such concrete such outcomes. Today, therefore, I'm inviting my colleagues from state parties, which are proposing and promoting specific proposals, and ask them to introduce their current status. I am deeply appreciative to my colleague who squeezed time to make this presentation. I do hope today's webinar will help facilitate in-depth and converging discussions in the coming MX meetings. Thank you very much for attention. And also, I'd like to invite Mr. Daniel Fricks, the chief of ISU, to make opening remarks. The screen is yours, Daniel-san.
Thank you, Mr. Nakai. Thanks very much, and welcome to everybody. It's great to have so many people online. We have around about 150 participants online now. We had around 200 registered altogether, so it's great to see the high level of interest in this particular topic as well. As we mentioned in the invitation when we sent that out, this is the first in a series of webinars that we are organizing with the chairs of each of the meetings of experts. You may recall that Ambassador Mailu, the chair of the meeting of states parties this year, encouraged the organization of such webinars before the meetings of experts. So we're very grateful, first of all, obviously now to Mr. Nakai and his colleagues in the Permanent Mission of Japan here in Geneva for supporting this particular webinar. And then also we're working, as I mentioned, with the other MX chairs for future webinars as well, which I'll mention in just a couple of minutes. Very good to see so many people, all relevant stakeholders, states parties, international organizations, regional organizations, academia and civil society are represented among the 150 or so people who are currently online listening to us and watching us. So we're very, very pleased, very grateful for you all spending the time, given that you are probably in many, many different time zones around the world. As Mr. Nakai just said, there are important issues being discussed in all of the meetings of experts, obviously, but here in MX2 on science and technology as well. So we're very grateful to those of you who are going to be making the presentations today for taking the time to do so. As Mr. Nakai mentioned, we're also very grateful to Dr. Clarissa Rios Rojas for her pre-recorded video, which hopefully many of you took the time to watch as well. It's still available, so you can watch that if you haven't yet done so as well. So we're also very grateful to her as well. If I could just ask my colleague to put the kind of rules for the webinar up on the screen. Mr. Nakai already mentioned the obvious. I'm sure everyone is used to this now already from the many webinars that we've all participated in over the last months, but please keep your cameras switched off and your microphones muted throughout the webinar. Because of the time constraints and the number of people who are participating, we can't give the floor individually to participants to ask questions, but as it says here on the screen, can you please, if you do have a question, can you please submit that through the chat function? You can submit your questions to host and presenter, as it says there. They'll be submitted privately, and if you could let us know who you would like to address your question to, and then we can pose as many of those questions as possible to the presenters during the Q&A session. This webinar will be recorded and the presentations will be made available for those unable to actually participate and watch along now. And as I mentioned, last point, this is the first in a series of 5 informal webinars to be held over the coming weeks, one on each of the meetings of experts. I can give you now verbally the dates of the upcoming ones, but we will also be sending out a save the date email for those particular upcoming webinars, and then more specific invitations, including agendas for each of them. The webinar on MX4 on assistance, response and preparedness will be the next one. That will be on the 12th of November. Then the webinar on MX3 on strengthening national implementation will be on the 16th of November. The webinar on MX5 on institutional strengthening of the convention will be on the 18th of November. And then finally, the webinar on MX1 on assistance and cooperation will take place on the 24th of November. But like I said, we will very shortly, hopefully maybe even later today, send out an email with those dates and titles as well. And as I mentioned, we'll send later on detailed agendas for each of those as well. I will stop there. I will hand back now to you, Mr. Nakai. Once again, thanks to you, thanks to Japan, thanks also obviously to my colleagues who are running everything in the background here, making sure everything flows smoothly on the technical side as well. So thank you, and back to you, Mr. Nakai.
Thank you very much, Daniel-san. I do appreciate your and your teams in organizing this webinar in such a short period of time. Your dedication and professional skills, only your dedication and professional skills can organize this webinar. Thank you very much. I appreciate your cooperation. And I'd like to move to the next topic of this webinar. Review of the science and technology development relevant to the conventions. This is the first, it is the first agenda of the MX2 throughout the intersessional period. And here we see two specific proposals about the mechanism of these reviews from Germany and Russia. Today, I'm inviting my colleagues from there to introduce the current status of their projects. Allow me to invite Mr. Eric Tintrap of the German Federal Foreign Ministry, which is proposing the scientific and technological experts at the advisory forums. Its working paper is presented in MX last year, and we'll be grateful if we can hear the current status of the German proposal. Mr. Tintrap, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Nakai. I hope you all can hear me. Thank you very much. Yeah, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, wherever you are. Many listeners, I'm very glad about that. It's good to be here. I should like to thank you again, Mr. Nakai, for chairing this useful webinar. I also thank Daniel Feeks and others for preparing and organizing all this so well. These days, it's really important to uphold the meeting schedules as much as possible. It's very essential for reaching our goals. So thank you all for that. This week for me is a bit like coming out to see the light after a long cold winter, although it has not even started. But because it's a while ago that we really could talk openly together about all this, as COVID-19 has taken its toll, and a long line of travels, discussions, etc. had to be postponed or cancelled. But we're all still here. We're all still working, alive and kicking, and we're still on our way towards the review conference. So my aim today is to recall the German Steve initiative, as we call it, to update you where it's standing today, and to point to the future as well, of course. Now, what is the Steve initiative, and how has it changed since 2019 when we submitted our working paper? As you know, the abbreviation stands for Scientific and Technological Experts Advisory Forum. In short, a science and technology mechanism to include the latest developments in science and technology into the BWC. So in 2019, in the framework of a side event to the MSP, as well as during the expert meetings, we promoted our idea about this, like several other state parties did as well, which is very good. We were very much encouraged by the reactions in the general debate. There were states from all regional groups who expressed support. Well, why should it be different? Because the general concept, I think, for everyone listening is absolutely logical. What would be more obvious than supporting and advising policy discussions on a largely technical subject, such as biosecurity, biosafety, by making full use of latest developments in SNT through scientific experts. So the idea is fairly simple. And so many other organizations benefit of similar mechanisms. So why shouldn't the BWC? And not to forget Article 12, BWC stipulates, of course, as you all know, a review process taking into account the latest development in science and technology. Of course, as always, the devil is in the detail. And of course, there are important questions which remain until today. Questions of objectives, the mandate and the focus, number of meetings, composition and number of participants, regional composition, leadership, process, outputs, decisions, reporting, and of course, always, of course, financing. So allow me to recall some of our approaches, the German approaches from our working paper. There were ideas like each regional group appoints several experts, 7 was the number at that time, for 5 years in a broad roster of international experts. These experts must be politically independent. There is a rotating chair elected from out of the forum. The group works on an own program, but deals also with specific questions from the state parties. There are annual meetings, annual reports, recommendations, administrative support by ISU, and funding from, if possible, the regular budget. So this was the end of 2019. What has happened since then? Where do we stand today? Scheduling meetings and discussions, as you all know, have proven to be very, very difficult due to COVID-19. However, we used the first half of 2020 to develop and establish a project supposed to advance the discussion and facilitate our deliberations. And now with our dedicated partners in the project from ISU, UNIDIR, UNODA, we are in the implementation phase of the project, you could say. What exactly is happening there? One important part of our project is a system of probably 3 workshops. One on analyzing existing S&T review mechanisms already in place in the multilateral environment. 2 other workshops to further develop the concept. So the series of the workshops was supposed to start on the sidelines of the expert meetings. So it couldn't start yet, as the expert meetings have not started yet, and it will probably only start in early 2021 with those workshops. That is the workshop part. The second part of the project is a study on establishing a review body. That study is undertaken for us by UNIDIR. It's about to be published also as early as early 2021. And this will be based on an ongoing survey, a survey that you, I hope all should be aware of already, a survey to which about 3 dozens, I think, of state parties have contributed already. This survey is dealing with exactly those questions that I mentioned before, composition of this body, funding, appointment, leadership, etc., etc., in order to feel the temperature among state parties on many of those important questions. Because in addition to just commenting on whole working papers, we thought it's a very good idea to directly ask for opinions on detailed aspects of the project. So thanks to all those who have already responded, and I would like to encourage all those who did not yet respond. There's still some time. We're convinced that the survey will give us important results, and personally, in comparing different approaches to the S&T review body, I think all in all we can find more common ground than we think today. I'm very glad that Jamie Reville from ISU will give a short update on details of the survey in a minute, and even on preliminary results that we have so far. That will, yes, as soon as I concluded my presentation, which I will now in a very short time, I just wanted to say, conclude by talking about the next steps. So the results of the survey will be the basis for the study and for workshops. And based on that, we will be testing the ground then, of course, for possible merging of different ideas, different concepts, and maybe in the shape of more concrete, and here I quote you, Mr. Nakai, concrete is the important word in this sense, a more concrete joint proposal. That would be the best that we could achieve. Timing will stay very difficult, but we have no choice than try our best. And talking for Germany, we are happy to reach out to anyone who's willing to achieve results in this question. We're exactly 1 year ahead of the 9th review conference, so we have less time than we had planned to build up a real sequence of expert meetings and conferences and PrepCom, but we can still do something if we are willing to make the progress and work hard. And important, if we show some flexibility. So we are inviting all state parties to join us in the upcoming workshops and discussions. Again, thank you for organizing this webinar. It's very appreciated. So thank you for your attention. And I think after me, it will be Jamie Reville who gives us a short opinion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, to address the German Idea University. Since, as you mentioned, since UNIDEO is working collaborating with you in developing this proposal, I'd like to invite Dr. Lebriville from UNIDEO to introduce what it is, its current activities, and share your findings among us. Dr. Lebriville, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nakai. Thank you to Daniel and colleagues in the ISU and to all the participants for your time. I should be quite clear, I'm UNIDEO, not part of the ISU, just as a sort of minor correction from the brief statement. But I'd also like to thank Mr. Tintrup. I think he's covered much of this, so I'll be brief in my remarks, and I'm happy to elaborate in the subsequent Q&A. But if I could have the next slide, please. Thank you. So just in terms of what we're trying to do as part of our strand of research, we have already undertaken an analysis of 20 existing S&T review mechanisms. That's in part using desk-based analysis, but also we've undertaken 19 interviews to go with that, and it's provided quite a fruitful basis, a fruitful discussion. As you know, as I was indicated before, we've used some of the results from the discussions that we've had, along with a review of past discussions in the BWC to inform the development of a survey of states parties. We have one more submission this morning, so currently we have 38 responses divided by regional groups. This works out at 14 WEOG responses, 7 EOG, and 17 NAM. Thank you, really thank you to all those who have sent us in submissions. It's really helpful to us to build an understanding. What we want to do moving forward is to have a discussion and get into some depth around some of the issues and points raised, but also sort of build our understanding of states' interests and concerns maybe in this area, so we can put this together as part of a final report, which will be due for publication in early 2021. And just to be quite clear, the report will consider background insights, the survey results, and we will be presenting options for states parties to consider. I should also note UNIDEO's work is done in coordination with the BWC ISU. So we talk about things like timing of events, but these are different tracks of activity with different purposes. And next slide, please. So there are several issue areas I think that would be useful to consider, and Mr. Tintrup has already elaborated on some of these in relation to his discussion around the staff. I think the mandate and objectives is particularly important. Having a clear understanding of who the review is for and why the review is needed can perhaps enable states parties to think through what's the most suitable mechanism they require. Another interesting point here is to think that compared to other existing mechanisms, the processes, the institutional setup for determining specific areas of activity may be quite different, so it might require some thinking. There are, of course, going to be issues around participation. I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide. And then issues of leadership and issues in terms of ways of working the process. So how often you're going to meet, where meetings should be located, and the important role of institutional support. Outputs are also quite important. So what do states actually want to get out of this? Do they want outputs which are information orientated or more action orientated, or both? I think it's something important to have in mind. And finally, the point raised before by Mr. Tintrup, the issue of funding. So assessed contributions, voluntary contributions, or a combination or additional points. And I think it's important to keep in mind that these are interconnected factors. So I think we need to sort of try to think of how these connect with each other. If I may have the next slide, please. I just want to sketch through on some of the provisional findings, and they are provisional. Most survey participants that we've had responses from view some form of S&T review mechanism as essential or important. However, there were a small number of states felt this was not the case. It's something important to keep in mind. One area of particular divergence is over the issue of participation, specifically whether participation should be set to a limited number of participants, for example, between 10 and 30, or indeed whether there is a much more open process whereby participants are nominated by states as part of a much larger grouping. I think that's something where there's potentially an area of divergence for consideration in your discussions. Nearly half the respondents that we've had responses from felt that any mechanism should meet twice a year, but there was actually some really interesting variation in how that should be configured. So some, for example, proposed virtual meetings. A number of respondents identified variations on meeting in locations outside of Geneva, which was quite interesting. And in terms of outputs, there was significant support for both technical analysis and recommendations, as well as having additional side events for space with space for question and answers. Okay, I'm happy to elaborate on some of the findings further in the question and answer session, but if I may move to the next slide finally. Yeah, thank you. So just to thank you again to those of you that have sent in a response. We are trying to keep this open until the 6th of November. So please do get in touch if this is an area of interest. We would greatly appreciate your views. This is also anonymous, so we're not going to identify any particular response to any particular actor. It's really just to get an understanding of generally of states' views. We're also, as I said, keen to talk to states in more depth about S&T review mechanisms and explore some of these questions further. So we are planning a series of regional consultations, sort of focal groups, and these will be arranged by time zone of capitals in due course. And please do feel free to contact me with any questions or queries. Myself and the team here, we're always happy to respond to questions on S&T reviews. And I'll leave it there, but I'm happy to take questions if people require elaboration. Thank you, Mr. Nakai.
Thank you very much, Dr. Revio, to introduce your activity and share some of important findings, which is very informative. Now, I would like to invite Lucian, who is proposing plans and advisory proposed to the preparatory committee of ACE review conference. This proposal is very valuable. Contains many important elements developing the science and technological review mechanism. I want to invite Constantin Borozov and ministries to introduce your proposal and introduce some update, if any. Constantin-san, screen is yours.
Thank you very much. I hope you hear me well. Wonderful. Thank you very much, Mr. Nakai. Thank you very much for the ISU and UNODA for organizing and convening these informal consultations and exchange of views on the problematics of the MX2 about developments in the field of science and technology related to the BWC. As you absolutely know, the Russian Federation emphasized a lot of time the importance of monitoring science and technology developments relating to the BWC. On the one hand, such monitoring is aimed at analyzing risks associated with various areas of research and technologies in order to reduce such risks to an acceptable level without damaging scientific and technological progress. On the other hand, there is a need to raise awareness and to widely spread knowledge and developments which can help implement the BWC objectives. First and foremost, prevent infectious diseases regardless of their nature. Next slide, please. Having analyzed the articles in the leading scientific journals, we know that today's scientists continue to conduct the following research. Studies of antimicrobial resistance and multiple drug resistance, studies of increase of the pathogenicity of microorganisms, studies of virulence genes, studies of strains with a changed host specificity and their selection, studies of microorganisms, strains evading immune responses, and studies of synthetic biology. These research activities require careful attention with the view to provide effective implementation of obligations under the BWC. In this regard, we would like to draw attention to the Russian initiative to establish a scientific advisory committee under the aegis of the convention. It was submitted to the preparatory committee of the 8th BWC Review Conference in April 2016 as our working paper. And now we are planning to refresh a little bit this working paper, and we are planning to submit our working paper with this initiative. So we consider it necessary to recall the fundamental elements of this initiative. Next slide, please. The role of the Scientific Advisory Committee is to render specialized advice to states parties in areas of science and technologies relevant to the Convention. The committee would have the following functions: assess and report of states parties' developments in scientific and technological fields relevant to the Convention. Next slide, please. By scientific and technological fields relevant to the Convention, we mean new science and technology developments that have potential for uses contrary to the provisions of the Convention, new science and technology developments that have potential benefits for the Convention, including those of special relevance to disease surveillance, diagnosis and mitigation, possible measures for strengthening national biological risk management as appropriate in research and development involving new science and technology developments of relevance to the Convention. Next slide, please. Voluntary codes of conduct and other measures to encourage responsible conduct by scientists, academia, and industry. Education and awareness raising about risks and benefits of life sciences and biotechnology. Science and technology related developments relevant to the activities of multilateral organizations such as the WHO, OIE, FAO, IPPC, and OPCW. Any other science and technology developments of relevance to the Convention. Next slide, please. Other functions of the committee would also include assessing and reporting on any developments in scientific and technological fields relevant to the Convention upon request of states parties, coordinating the efforts of temporary working groups in case they are established within the committee, and providing advice and make recommendations taking into account any new scientific and technological developments relevant to the Convention for the purpose of assisting states parties in their review of the operation of the Convention pursuant to its Article 12. Next slide, please. In our opinion, the committee should consist of 20 members appointed by regional groups of states parties to the Convention. Once all regional groups have made their appointments, the committee may begin its activities. Only citizens of states parties would be eligible to serve as members of the committee or its temporary working groups. They shall serve in an individual capacity as independent experts. We believe that members of the committee should be appointed from eminent persons active at such institutions as research institutions, universities, biotechnological companies, defense and military organizations, on the basis of their expertise in the particular scientific fields relevant to the implementation of the Convention. Such persons should be selected based on their qualifications and experience, taking into account their publications, scientific, academic, or professional activities, distinctions, and international experience with due regard to the area of specialty. We suggest that the term of office of members of the committee should be 5 years. The next slide, please. The committee is supposed to appoint by consensus a chair and a vice chair biannual election from among its members. The chair of the committee, through the chief of the implementation support unit, would notify each member of the committee of a planned meeting, stating the purpose, the venue, the opening date, and the expected duration of the meeting as far in advance as possible, but at least 30 days before the opening day of the meeting. The provisional agenda would be transmitted together with the notice of the meeting. Next slide, please. A provisional agenda for each meeting of the committee would be prepared by its chair. The committee adopts an agenda for each of its meetings on the basis of the provisional agenda submitted by the chair. The provisional agenda may be revised as necessary by deferring, deleting, or amending items on the agenda, and the state's parties may include in the agenda of the committee any item that they wish to be discussed by the committee. Next slide, please. At the same time, states parties may establish temporary working groups of scientific experts to provide recommendations on specific scientific and technological issues relevant to the convention. Additionally, if the committee deems it advisable, each chair may propose to states parties to establish such temporary working groups. Each working group could be chaired by a member of the committee, appointed for that purpose by its chair with other members concurring. Chair of the committee should appoint members of temporary working groups from experts proposed by states parties and or suggested by members of the committee. The chair of the committee would transmit to the chair of each working group a mandate setting out the specific issue to be addressed and the time limit within which the working group must report on the issue. The chair of the temporary working group convenes meetings of the group. For this purpose, the chair, through the chief of the ISU, notifies each member of the committee of a planned meeting, stating the purpose, the venue, the opening date, and the expected duration of the meeting at least 30 days before the opening day of the meeting. And the chief of the ISU would provide through the ISU appropriate administrative and technical support for the preparation, organization, and implementation of the committee's activities and that of its temporary working groups. Next slide, please. The committee should meet at least annually in order to provide to states parties a report of its activities, including an account of its contributions during the year. Chair of the committee, through the chief of the ISU, would inform its members in advance about the time and place of such a meeting. Unless prior written approval has been obtained from the chair of the committee or the chair of a temporary working group, observers will not be permitted to attend meetings of the committee nor of the temporary working groups. The report might include the reports of the temporary working groups covering the same period. All such reports are adopted by consensus. The conclusions and recommendations are developed through a consensus process. If consensus on the conclusions and recommendations cannot be achieved, the report reflects any minority views as appropriate. The official languages of the committee would be Arabic, Chinese, English, French, Russian, and Spanish. The working language would be English. Interpretation would be arranged by the ISU. We would like to encourage the BWC states parties to support the initiative to establish a scientific advisory committee in the framework of the convention and assist in its practical implementation, including by taking relevant decisions at the 2021 BWC Review Conference. It should be noted that such frameworks are widely used internationally. In particular, OPCW Scientific Advisory Board has been functioning well. And the Russian delegation is open to any constructive proposals from other states parties or academia or international community to improve this initiative. Thank you very much. And the next slide. Thank you. So we would be ready to answer any questions and would be absolutely grateful for any proposals, suggestions from international community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Konstantin, to explain the Russian proposal on Science Advisory Committee. And also, now first committee is still going on, and you are responsible for promoting some of most important Russian resolutions. Therefore, I'm particularly grateful for you to squeeze this time and join this webinar. And yes, now we have covered the second topic, review of science and technological developments relevant to the conventions. If there is anybody who has questions to those panelists, you are most welcome to send your question through chat functions. Allow me to move into the next agenda, biological risk assessment and management. The second agenda of MX2 in the intersessional period. On this agenda, we are very pleased to see new, very practical and useful working papers are presented by United States and Belgium, and we are inviting our colleagues from those countries to introduce the ideas. At first, allow me to invite Ms. Danielle C. Roman of the U.S. State Department to talk about the latest working paper on approaches to governance for advancing science and technology of relevant to the BWC. Daniela-san, the screen is yours.
Well, thank you, Mr. Nakai, for that introduction. Can you hear me okay? Perfect. Well, thank you also for your leadership in this year's science and technology discussions. And hello, everybody. I am Danielle Lohman, and while I am now with the United States Department of State, I'm also a biochemist. Scientific background, I feel especially privileged to present the U.S. working paper to this group on governance for advances in the life sciences. I hope that it will provide a good background for our discussions in MX2 this December. Next slide, please. The term governance in the BWC context refers to a specific concern about misuse, a concern about biological weapons. The concept of governance includes a suite of measures or a broad range of possible measures that reduce the risk of advances in life sciences can be misused for biological weapons development. The U.S. working paper describes the many forms that governance can take, as well as the key factors to consider when tailoring a governance approach to a specific concern. It also includes a few ideas for the roles that BWC experts' discussions can play in terms of governance. Next slide, please. Why is governance such an important topic within the Biological Weapons Convention? Well, during our current BWC intersessional process, one of the themes that states parties have been discussing is how to ensure that new science and technology advances are not used to make biological weapons. That's a very natural concern for this group. And there's also a logical flow to considering these issues. It begins with identification. What are the advances of concern? And we just heard from our last speaker a few examples that this community might be worried about. Next, how do we clearly assess the potential risks for those technologies? And finally, what are the options to manage these risks while also protecting the benefits? Next slide, please. In 2018 and, oops, one slide back, please. Thank you. In 2018 and 2019, states parties and non-governmental groups have discussed these first two questions. Today, I'd like to focus on the third question, on governance approaches. Next slide now. Thank you. Well, governance can take many forms. In fact, often governance does not include one single measure, but rather a suite of measures that are tailored to a particular concern. One way we can think about governance is a possible range of measures that are on a spectrum. So governance can include anything from hard law measures to informal ones, or anything from top-down measures to bottom-up measures. Next slide, please. I think when we say governance, the type of measure that comes most immediately to mind are hard law measures. These are measures that have binding legal effect, and they can include international agreements. For example, the Biological and Toxins Weapons Convention. They can also include national laws and regulations. For example, many countries regulate the possession of certain pathogens, and they have corresponding criminal penalties. Now, these hard law measures are critical, of course, but they are not the only governance tool. Next slide, please. Informal measures are another tool. Informal measures, while not legally binding, do reinforce the global norm that life scientists use their skills and use their technologies and knowledge for peaceful purposes. One example of an informal measure would be the ethical codes of conduct that professional societies develop. So, for example, the American Society for Microbiology has a code of ethics, and this code condemns bioterrorism. It condemns the use of microbes as biological weapons. Another example would be the voluntary code of conduct that has been proposed by China and by Pakistan in the BWC setting, which we'll hear about shortly. Next slide, please. Another way we can think about governance is as top-down or bottom-up measures. Top-down measures are those measures that are enacted by governments. They can include national laws and regulations. They can also include national policies. The United States policy surrounding dual-use research of concern is a good example. This is a policy that specifies the oversight requirements to limit the potential that life sciences research would be misused. Next slide, please. Finally, bottom-up measures play an important role, especially for those issues that are rapidly changing. So often, bottom-up measures have a more self-regulatory nature, and they are a way to demonstrate practitioner stewardship. For those of you who tuned into Unidear's webinar earlier this year, you saw many good examples of bottom-up measures that are happening already in various communities. One of the speakers was from IGEM, or the International Genetically Engineered Machine Foundation. This is an organization that hosts a worldwide synthetic biology competition. Another example would be the International Gene Synthesis Consortium. This is an industry-led group or a coalition of companies that has come together to safeguard biosecurity while also promoting the beneficial uses of gene synthesis. I think our next speaker will present on another type of governance measure, international standards. They'll be talking about the ISO standard for biorisk management in laboratories. Next slide, please. Importantly, there's not a one-size-fits-all governance approach, either for every country or in terms of every scientific development. When countries or communities are deciding on governance approaches in a specific setting or for a particular development, there are a number of factors that come into play. We can consider the risk involved compared to the likely benefits for a specific advance. We can consider the type of risk posed. In some cases, we might be concerned about the risk of performing certain experiments. In other cases, we might be concerned about certain equipment being misused. Risk tolerance is another important factor. And tolerance can vary depending on the setting or the stakeholders involved. And this is an area where being able to accurately predict the nature of the benefits of a technology is especially useful. Finally, influencing all of these considerations is the rapid pace of science advancement. Next slide, please. The rapid speed of development in science is one of the main challenges to governance. Some governance measures are slower to put in place, and then once enacted, they can be hard to change. Those constant governance measures provide a very useful frame of reference, However, they might have a hard time keeping pace with all of the specifics and the nuance of technological developments. And so sometimes it's useful to have governance measures that are more responsive to the facts on the ground. Governance measures that are agile, flexible, and iterative. One example of this would be the work that the iGEM Foundation that I mentioned earlier is doing. They have a safety and security program that is designed to evolve with the field of synthetic biology and to respond in real time when biosecurity issues come up. Next slide, please. Well, in the BWC context, we do have a tendency to focus on the potential risks of science developments, but it's also important to consider and to promote their benefits. For instance, many countries take special care to make sure that governance approaches do not unreasonably stifle innovation, and that they continue to promote biotechnology for peaceful purposes all around the globe. The goal, of course, is to realize the benefits while minimizing the risks. Next slide, please. The BWC Meeting of Experts is an important and a unique international venue for states parties to share their experience about the governance measures they are taking to implement the BWC. And you will see some ideas for how BWC experts can discuss governance on the slide. States parties could provide information on national approaches to governance. They can compare notes, exchange best practices and lessons learned. They can also work to identify opportunities or explore ways to harmonize governance measures. That harmonization is especially important to promote the benefits of a technology and also to promote cooperation. Next slide, please. To reiterate just a few key elements from the US working paper, governance is a suite of measures that are often tailored to a specific concern. And when groups and communities are deciding on an appropriate governance approach, there are many factors that come into play. One of the most important ones is taking into account the benefits. Finally, the BWC is a unique, but one of many settings where countries have an opportunity to share experiences and explore ways to harmonize governance measures. I would like to again thank Mr. Nakai and the ISU for their work in organizing this webinar. I look forward to hearing from our next speaker and later on to the discussions in December during MX2. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lohmann, to introduce your comprehensive and also very practical governance approach. It is of great use in enhancing our discussion on biosecurity management, in the coming review conference. Thank you very much. And now I'd like to invite our Belgian friends to talk about their latest working paper on biorisk management standards and their role in BWC implementation, in which they mentioned, they refer to the ISO 35001, an industrial standard, can be good guidance or references in helping the state party to implement the obligation of the set out in BWC. So I'd like to invite Mr. Musin, if I pronounce it correctly, Mr. Musin of the Belgian Foreign Ministry to introduce the Belgian proposal on this issue. Mr. Musin, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, dear colleagues. And apologies to colleagues in the Pacific for hacking your night's rest. I would like to thank Japanese Chair Mr. Kazuhiro Nakai and ISU Director Danielle Feeks for offering Belgium the opportunity to present its working paper. I also would like to thank my fellow speakers. I'm Frank Meusen, Deputy Director of the Non-Proliferation and Disarmament Department of the Belgian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Next slide, please. This Tuesday, Belgium submitted a working paper entitled Biorisk Management, Standards and Their Role in BTWC Implementation. The paper can be found on the ISU's website, and I would like to thank co-sponsors Austria, Chile, France, Germany, Iraq, Ireland, the Netherlands, Spain, and Thailand. The working paper is in fact a follow-up to a working paper that Belgium submitted in 2011 ahead of the 7th review conference. The main new element in our 2020 working paper is the adoption in 2019 of a biorisk management standard by the International Standard Organization. For people wondering what biorisk means, the term biorisk encompasses both biosafety and biosecurity. In short, biosafety is about keeping bad bugs away from people, and biosecurity is about keeping bad people away from bugs. And since biorisk management covers both, I guess it is about keeping bugs away from people in general, good or bad. Next slide, please. The position put forward in our working paper is that the promotion of voluntary biorisk management standards contributes to the implementation of the convention, and specifically Article 4 that you see on the screen. In Article 4, state parties commit to taking all necessary measures to prohibit and prevent the development of biological weapons. And in the REFCON's review conference's understanding, this necessitates inter alia the enactment of biosafety and biosecurity measures aimed at preventing the accidental release of or unintentional exposure to biological agents and toxins and preventing the loss, theft, unauthorized possession or transfer and misuse of biological dual-use agents. Next slide, please. So the 7th review conference recognized the value of voluntary application of such management standards for a BTWC implementation. And you see on the screen also a reference to the other measures like the bottom-up measures like presented in the former presentation by Dr. Lohmann, also a reference to codes of conduct and awareness raising. So this biorisk management standard is also in this group of measures that we want to promote. In fact, already years before, and not directly connected to the BTWC, biosafety professionals worldwide identified the need for common language to promote biosafety and biosecurity. And the biosafety associations of Asia Pacific, Europe, and the United States managed to draft a biorisk management document that was published in 2008 by the European Committee for Standardization. It took 11 more years to get to a global document. Next slide, please. So in November 2019, the International Standard Organization published the 35001 standard on biorisk management for laboratories and other related organizations. Any ISO standard is developed by means of a multi-stakeholder process involving experts from around the world, coming from industry, professional associations, academia, NGOs, and government. The experts gather in a committee, negotiate all aspects of the standard, and adopt it in consensus, after which it is published. The ISO 35001 was developed by Technical Committee 212, specialized in clinical laboratory testing, the secretariat of which is held by the American National Standard Institute, ISO's member for the USA. Next slide, please. So a few questions come to mind. How does an ISO biorisk management standard work? Well, in fact, the standard is a voluntary tool that can be applied by all facilities, governmental, non-governmental, academic, and so on, that handle hazardous biological agents. The management system supports a facility to ensure biosafety and biosecurity in a systematic, sustainable, and measurable way. The document provides definitions on all relevant concepts. It describes the essential components of a biorisk management system, such as procedures, training, and reporting. It also lists possible risk mitigating measures, including vaccination, vetting of staff, physical measures, agent inventories. The approach is not one size fits all, it is risk-based. Before elaborating the management system, an organization has to identify the biological risks inherent to its specific activities and the resources at its disposal to address these specific risks. The system is dynamic in the sense that it generates continual improvement through a plan, do, check, act approach. And the system facilitates both internal audits as external third-party conformity assessment, which is typical for ISO standards. Independent validation of conformity, showcased by the requirement of a certificate, allows an organization to demonstrate that it applies a biorisk policy that meets the ISO standards. So the next question is, what's the relation between the ISO standards and legislation? Of course, compliance with the standard is not a substitute to compliance with national legislation. So if any part of a standard would be in conflict with any legal requirement, the law overrules the standard, of course. So why would life science facilities apply such a standard? Typically, they are applied to manage biological risk internally and to demonstrate this externally by means of a certificate. Application of the standard also allows to enter an international level playing field and facilitates engagement with international partners. It can also facilitate international transfers of biological dual-use goods. And it allows an organization to continuously improve its biological safety and security and keep up with opportunities and risks presented by the rapid developments in biological science and technology. What is the relevance of this standard for the BTWC? So it must be clear, of course, that this kind of bottom-up, let's say, non-governmental, non-binding measures are in no way a substitute for the responsibility of states parties to implement and comply the convention through policy, legislation, and enforcement. They also do not provide fail-proof guarantees against unlawful use of biological agents and materials. They do, however, have the potential of strengthening the global implementation of the convention through reinforced biosafety and biosecurity, through increased mutual confidence, including by means of certification, and through facilitating international dialogue, cooperation, and assistance. Next slide, please. So in the working paper, we propose that the states parties of the BTWC welcome these developments and encourage the implementation of these standards. The states parties reiterate the recognition that biorisk management standards can play a complementary and supportive role for the convention, to call on life science community to adhere to these standards, encourage state parties to provide assistance where appropriate for the implementation of biorisk management standards in life science institutions in accordance with Article 10. And we stress the importance of a dialogue with representatives from biosafety associations, the life sciences community, and international standard organizations. So finally, the norm against the weaponization of biological agents is strong. Fortunately, this norm is strong despite the convention's very modest institutions. And this is in no way a criticism towards the ISU that is doing, of course, an excellent job, but is indeed a very small institution. So there is no consensus among states parties to significantly grow the convention's institutions. It is this context that inspired Belgium to look for ways to support the convention's norm and build confidence in compliance by means of concrete actions in the convention's periphery. So this includes supporting and setting up peer review exercises, also strengthening the norm against biological weapon use in the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court that has now made the use of a biological weapon a war crime, and also by promoting, and this is the topic of today, by promoting biorisk management standards. My presentation ends here, so next slide. Yes, next slide, please. So I will answer questions during the Q&A. And in consultation with the co-sponsors, Belgium plans to distribute a written Q&A document on our working paper and on the biorisk management standards. And you can also contact my colleague Vincent Botson, based in Geneva, or myself, and I'm based in Brussels. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nielsen, for your very detailed explanation of latest proposal of Belgium. Dr. Rojas, in her opening video presentation, She emphasized the importance of the collaboration of industries in enhancing BWC implementations. Your specific proposal referring to the ISO 35001 is very helpful in finding how we should start and enhance collaboration with the business sector. Thank you very much indeed. Now allow me to move into the next topic, development of voluntary model code of conducts for biological scientists. As mentioned by our US colleagues, China in this field is taking a leading role. China submitted a proposal for development of model code of conduct in 2015 MSP. China then drafted such models and revised and evolved and revised it. I understand the latest revision was done in 2018. Today, I'm happy to invite Mr. Chu Yang of the Associate Professor of Tianjin University to introduce Chinese proposal and its current position. Professor, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Nakai-san. Can you hear me? It's clear?
Yes, I can hear very well.
Yeah, okay. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good evening, or good morning, and good afternoon. The Center of Biosafety Research and Strategy, CBRS, of Tianjin University, greatly appreciates the opportunity to present at this meeting. I'm Dr. Yang. CBRS is the first NGO in the field of biosafety in China, with the and policy supports to biological arms control, non-proliferation, disarmament, and general biosafety management. Okay, next slide, please. Since 2016, CBRS has been working on various tasks related to the ASBWC Review Conference. CBRS members participated in the writing of the proposal for the development of a code of conduct for biological scientists by the delegation of China and Pakistan for the ASBWC Review Conference. I'm very pleased to hear Ms. Daniel mention it just now. Next slide, please. Through this proposal, Chinese scientists call on biological researchers in China and around the world to work together and develop a code of conduct for biology scientists under the framework of the relevant Convention of the United Nations, with the goal to enhance global biosafety management. Next, please. Under the guidance of the code, biological researchers can assess risks of their research in a timely manner and take feasible measures to consciously avoid or terminate any risk projects. This Chinese initiative mainly has following characteristics. Next, please. First is volunteerness. We have noticed that many countries have enacted their own code of conduct or ethical guidelines on the fields of biological sciences. The initiative proposed by Chinese scientists fully considered the issue mentioned above and also realized a fact that many biological research activities may not violate the law but the human conscience. In order to achieve the purpose of self-consciousness and self-discipline, we hope that this initiative will clarify to our scientists the moral line which they should keep in mind and respect when they engage in research activities. After the Mode Code of Conduct being adopted by the convention, our state parties and scientific communities could choose their own ways to execute it, which has no conflict to their previous standards. Next, please. Second is openness. Chinese scientists have fully incorporated comments and suggestions made from many aspects, including cooperations and scientific communities, in the process of development of the Mode Code of Conduct, which is entirely open and transparent. Chinese scientists hoped the Mode Code of Conduct could become a model for all the other parties and scientific communities to develop their own standards and complete it with various practice and experiences. It also become a process of extensive consultation and joint construction which make the model code of conduct even more mature. Next, please. Third is whole process management. Now the draft has 10 items, including ethical standard, research integrity, respect for the object of research, process management for science research, constraint on the spread of research outcome, popularization of science and technology, institutions' role, education and training, awareness and engagement, and international exchanges, which are aimed at promoting scientists' awareness of biological security. These items contain the whole process of biotechnology research, which to a large extent will be able to prevent abuse and misuse of biotechnology and promote its safe development. Chinese scientists find the proposed code of conduct to be a positive contribution to the convention. Aspirational codes have been used successfully in other scientific fields to encourage a culture of responsible conduct and reinforce important norms. The field of biological sciences would benefit from its own code, as would the Biological Weapons Convention. We also find the elements of the code that consider the practice of science to be most useful. For example, performing a risk evaluation is something that some scientists can implement in their own work, and policies can be built around such suggestions. In addition to these general observations, we had extensive discussion with biological scientists in China, and the Chinese scientists offer some new suggestions for consideration, such as, next please. It would be useful to add to the third sentence some words that note that not only has the probability of misuse increased, but also the potential consequences have substantially increased. It now raises, therefore, the threshold for biological weapons production and process is lowered, and the possibility of misuse and abuse of biological technology and the probability of bioterrorism is increasing. Based on the novel coronavirus epidemic, consider revising that sentence to say, therefore, threshold for biological weapons production and process is lowered, and the novel organisms could more easily be created with the capacity to cause great harm or start new epidemics. The possibility of misuse and abuse of biological technology and the probability of terrorism is increasing. Next, please. Chinese side is working on revising the draft code of conduct and will present a new version at the experts meeting at the meeting of state parties and the 9th BWC review conference. We welcome the viewpoints and suggestions from all parties, especially from the scientific field. We will take the opportunity to further discuss the proposal for the development of a model code of conduct for biological scientists with all parties, with an aim to contribute more to strengthening the global biosafety and biosecurity governance, enhancing some interests, achieving universal security, so as to build up a community of shared future of biological security. Last but not least, I wish the meeting full success. Thank you for your time and attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Xu Yans, for your very compact but detailed explanation of China's long-term contribution towards code of conduct in BWC. Thank you very much indeed. And also, then I would like to invite Dr. Narumiya Shinomiya, who is developing and promoting such code of conduct in Japanese scientific communities. He would like to talk about his experience, important element to be included in code of conduct, and he will share some of his findings. Dr. Shinomiya, screen is yours.
Hello. I would like to express my sincere thanks to Mr. Nakai, Mr. Fix, and technical staffs of ISU. So can you hear me? Okay, yeah. So it's my great honor to have a chance to make a presentation in this MX2 meeting webinar. And In the previous presentation, Dr. Yan said that China and Pakistan are jointly submitting a proposal about the importance of the implementation of the Code of Conduct. Here, I'd like to share my experience about making recommendations for the revision of Code of Conduct for scientists in my country. Next slide, please. This slide shows the dual-use nature of life science technology. Life science technology should be used for peaceful purposes and social welfare, green direction, but the same technology could be used for malign purposes, such as making bioweapons, conducting a terrorist attack, and sometimes leading to environmental destruction, red direction. There are two sides in any technology. This is called dual-use issues, and dual-use research of concern, or DURC, is defined as a research field that could be directly misapplied to pose a significant threat with broad potential consequences to public health and safety, the environment, or national security. Next slide. This slide shows typical examples of dual-use research of concern in microbiology. First, recombinant DNA technology has produced bacteria and viruses that possess new pathogenicity. Second, reverse genetics has brought a new research area about influenza viruses, enabling the resurrection of old viruses and changing the host range. Third, synthetic biology has made it possible to produce artificially designed pathogens. Next slide, please. In response to the accident and the bioterrorism incident using pathogens, the Inter-Academy panel made a statement on biosecurity in 2005. They quoted the word of Francois Rabelais, "Knowledge without conscience is simply the ruin of the soul," and emphasized the 5 items here: awareness, safety and security, education and information, accountability, and oversight. Next slide, please. Related to the IAP statement, Kiyoshi Kurokawa, the president of the Science Council of Japan at that time, made the comment, but no further positive action had been taken until the H5N1 avian influenza gain-of-function research issue came up. Next slide. As many of you know, controversial studies attracted people's attention in November 2011. Could you forward? At that time, there was no system to obtain international pre-approval for the activity of, related to DURC. And most countries did not have formal mechanisms in place to review the gain-of-function research before starting. Next slide, please. Next year, in 2012, moratorium is proposed by the scientists involved in the flu gain-of-function research. At the same time, they argued about the importance of flu transmission studies. So next slide. In response to the increased debate on the dual-use issues in science and technology, the Science Council of Japan organized the ad hoc committee to discuss this issue. 10 members from different areas of expertise were assigned to this committee. Could you move forward? Yeah. Dr. Yoshikura led the meeting as a chairperson, and could you move forward? And Dr. Kawaoka, most of you know, he shared his experience about the gain-of-function flu studies. And move forward. And I myself played a role as a coordinator in the meeting. Next slide, please. So after repeated discussion, the committee submitted a report on dual-use issues in science and technology to the parent meeting. Could you move forward? Yes. And the report recommends that scientists and engineers are under moral obligation to scrutinize the use of their products against misuse. It also says scientists and engineers should discuss this and related matters in a transparent manner in public, and emphasizes that the code should be continuously applied to problems in the real world that confront scientists and engineers in daily activities. Next slide, please. This is a report from the ad hoc committee, and could you move forward? And then it was reflected to the revision of the Code of Conduct for Research Scientists. And could you move forward? And Article 6 on dual issues in scientific research has been newly added. So currently, Japanese scientists use this version. Next slide, please. Also, the results of discussion in the ad hoc committee was reflected to other proposals, such as the strategic proposal from Japan Science and Technology Agency, left side, and the proposal from the section meeting on pathogens research in the Science Council of Japan, right side. Next slide, please. So this scheme shows how we can implement effective governance in dealing with dual issues among different R&D levels and different stakeholders. The stakeholders include government, funding agencies, research societies, research institutions, and each researcher. The R&D levels are drawn according to the timeline from research planning to publication from left to right. It is important to harmonize the two-way approach. Could you click? Could you move forward? Yes. Bottom-up approaches such as awareness rating, supervision or guidance is very important, and also top-down approaches such as science policy and research evaluation. We are doing both directions. Could you move forward? Next slide. Yeah, this is the conclusion. I would like to recommend the following issues. One, voluntary motivation of research scientists should be respected in making the code of conduct. Two, top-down and bottom-up approaches should be well harmonized to implement the effective governance. Three, the code of conduct for research scientists should refer to dual-use research of concern, as well as research integrity. Four, public engagement is essential to promote safe and secure research activities. So the scientists should explain their research in a transparent manner. Next slide. Next slide, please. I'm making an effort to introduce such kind of effort to the public, publishing these books. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shinomiya, to share your precious experience, which are all valuable in developing discussion of code conduct towards concrete outcome on the review conference. I do appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now we hear all the very good presentation, which are very well thoughtful and thought-provoking and useful in developing our discussions. And yes, actually, we have received several questions for those panelists. But owing to my mismanagement of the moderations, we do not have enough time. But allow me to maybe I'm asking one question to each of the panelists, if it is okay. For the Mr. Kintrap and Mr. Constant on the science and review mechanism. We have received several questions, and one of them is about the political independence, namely how to achieve the political independence of the expert, which is the member of such committee. I understand political independence is one of the hotly debated issues when we are talking about how to develop the mechanism for science review conference. Therefore, I will be very happy if you can briefly introduce how to secure political independence of such mechanisms in German and Russian proposal. And for Dr. Rohans, the question to you is, why is the harmonization of governance measures important? And do you have specific ideas for how country can harmonize? A kind of a question of the harmonization of the overall assessment of overall approach to the governance. I'm very happy if you can hear all of this. But anyway, let me start with asks our German and the Russian colleagues to answer the question and to answer the question on how to achieve the political independence of each mechanism. If it is okay, Mr. Tintrop, screen is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Nakai. I want to be very brief. Thank you for the question. I think this is the major question when we're talking about the board, but also maybe the most difficult. Maybe the shortest answer is that I would say it depends. Well, the more independent scientists are, the more scientists they are. In the sense that I think that all members of a board should have a scientific record of well, publications and should be appreciated scientists. So that takes them the furthest away from being just political appointees or so. So it really depends on how is the image and the record of those people within the scientific world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Brief but to the point. Can I invite Mr. Konstantin Borozov about the Russian approach to secure the political independence of the Science Advisory Committee?
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much for the question. The independence in this case is a really important factor that is needed to be assured. And it is a critical factor for the efficiency of the future work of this kind of committee. As for ensuring the independence of the experts, so we can actually figure out different aspects. First of all, it is the aspect of appointment of these experts and the aspect of choosing procedure for the experts. So, as I said in our presentation, the factor of expertise, the level of experience, and different scientific and academic activities and professional activities, level of professionalism of experts would be the main factors in the framework of the process of appointment of these experts by the states parties. And another aspect, it is the independence of work of specific experts in the framework of the committee. And as we presented in our statement, the committee would work absolutely independently from the direct interference or direct involvement of the states parties and of the ISU to the work of the committee. So it would be just the work of the committee, and it would be just several connections. First connection, it is that the states party would propose different items, different issues to be discussed in the framework of the committee. And the next connection, it is that the committee would report to the states parties on the results of its work. But besides that, the work of the committee would be absolutely independent, and the experts would be in their personal capacity and would work in independent capacity as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Konstantin-san. As always, very clear and straightforward. And may I invite also Dr. James Levy, if you have any views on the issue of the ensuring political independence of such mechanism?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Nakai. In our interviews in the first phase, several interviewees stressed the importance of having independence as being crucial for an effective and a credible scientific mechanism. So I agree with the attention to this. I think it's important. A couple of points on this. The chair will have a key role in setting the tone of the discussions that can shape that sort of independence and that scientific focus. The nature of the questions which are put to any mechanism will also have a role. And it's also worth noting that other mechanisms have developed systems which are able to, for example, have declarations of interest or language in the terms of reference for participants, which might be worth of interest. I'll leave it there because we're short of time. But thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Very, very useful. And also we received one question about U.S. approach to governance for the advancement in science and technological relevance to the BWC. The question is the harmonization of the governance that Dr. Rohan mentioned. Why is the harmonization of the governance measures important? Do you have specific idea of how many countries can harmonize? Dr. Rohan, I would appreciate if you can share some of your thoughts regarding these questions. Dr. Rohan, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Nakai. I appreciate the question. So why is harmonization so important? I think we all know that science is a global enterprise, and that any development in one setting quickly is moved to another setting, which is a good thing. The rules change depending on the setting. That makes it a little bit easier for those with ill intent to do harm. And it also makes it harder for those who want to cooperate and want to collaborate to do so. So I think harmonization is important for those two reasons. You also asked about specific ideas, and I think I would say that there are a number of settings where this type of harmonization is already happening. The one that comes to mind is actually a group called the International Experts Group of Biosafety and Biosecurity Regulators. So that's one setting where people are already coming together from different countries to compare notes. And within the BWC context, I think that we have a lot to learn from one another. I think we might find that some countries have governance approaches that have worked really well. Others, they might have done differently if they had been able to predict the future. So we can learn from one another. And I do hope that over the next few years, states parties could focus on this conversation. Thank you, Mr. Nakai. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Doctor. And regarding Belgian proposals, or we have one question, interesting question about the feedback from the relevant stakeholders on ISO 35001. It was introduced as ISU 35001. It was introduced in 2019. And the question is that, is there any feedback from relevant stakeholders since its introduction? Mr. Musens, I would be grateful if you can share some of the information regarding this question on the feedback after the start of this ISO 35001. Mr. Musens, screen is yours if you have any comments.
Yes, what I can say is that, in fact, before the ISO was published, there was this European standard that has been applied in many ways by many stakeholders. Now, I've been reaching out to ISO to find out, let's say, the response of life science facilities to the publication. ISO told me that it's difficult to say because they sell the standard on their website. But it is also, let's say, published and offered by all the national standard bodies of all the ISO member states, which are like all states in the world. So it's very decentralized, and it's difficult to keep track. There's not a central, let's say, track-keeping mechanism. And when it comes to certification, I was doing some research. I could not find immediately, facilities who already had the certification. But in dialogue with the experts, also our compatriot, Dr. Toon de Kezel, who joins us today. In fact, the ISO is still now developing, the technical committee, guidelines for conformity assessment. So let's say the standard is already there, but let's say the tools you need for really to get the certification going, this is still under development. So this could also explain why currently there is not that much certification going on already. But we hope that that will change, of course. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nielsen. Very to the point answer. And regarding code of conduct, one question to the Professor Yang about next step. China has worked upon this exercise, work upon code of conduct for many years, revising a lot of revising the textual code of conduct. The question is, please outline the next step planned by China with the textual code of conduct proposal. How are you going to further develop or evolve this proposal? Dr. Yang, I would appreciate if you can share some of your information, the finding on this issue.
Thank you, Ms. Nakai. About future works, the code of conduct can be an important contribution and have its intended impact if it will be a part of scientific culture. And if scientists are aware that a code exists, and I think the scientist's perspective, the need for the code and the government, private investors, and the public attach importance to whether scientists follow the code. And in looking to the future, I think we are very open to the viewpoints and suggestions of the academic organizations, NGOs, enterprises, and so on, with the goal to reach consequence among all state parties, organizations, and NGOs, hopefully adopted by state parties, building implementation mechanism at international and national level. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jansen. Appreciate to share your the future ideas with us at this occasion. Thank you very much. And Dr. Shinomiya, we have one question to you regarding the best practice, which you mentioned in your presentations. Question is about what is introduce specific best practice, which is particularly useful in promoting the ethical research among researchers and students. Most grateful if you can introduce some of the best practice you have taken advantage of.
Very much. I think the code of conduct should be more spread among the research scientists. Actually, we are doing education about this research to the college students or the graduate school students. So it's very important to start learning about the code of conduct from the very young stage. So I think it's very important. Also, code of conduct are very, very important for leader scientists like a PI or a research planner. So I think this framework should be promoted more to other universities or other facilities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doctor, for answering that specific questions. Actually, we have several more questions, but the time is already expected that time for webinar is already over. We'd like to bring this question. We'd like to bring this question as a MX2 chair. We'd like to bring the questions in my heart, and I am to guide the discussion in MX in December. Thank you very much for your active participations and also candid answers to active participation from the participants, active engagement of participants, and candid answer of the panelists. Yes, actually, as MX2 chairs, I think that the BWC, what is imperative for BWC in the wake of the COVID-19, it is affecting all of us, all aspects of life. Imperative is to produce concrete and tangible outcomes to address those issues, those problems. And in MX2s, I am convinced that we have sufficient build-up for discussions and the good proposals, which can be the basis for such outcomes to be agreed and announced in review conference. In this webinars, we have a chance to reflect what we have discussed and confirm what what practical ideas are already on the table to discuss that. These two exercises is of particular importance and their use in preparing for the next meeting in coming December. Once again, I would appreciate all the panelists who are so kind enough to take part in this webinar in such a short period of time, and ISU to organize the successful and comprehensive webinar in short period of time. Thank you very much for everybody to take part in this seminar. And just to make it sure, let me briefly reintroduce the future calendar of the webinar. November 12 is a webinar for MX4. November 6, MX3. November 18, MX5. November 24, MX1. We are going to have each MX. That's what we have discussed and what we can propose we can work upon. I'm happy this webinar, the first webinar of this series, MX2, that is useful and effective in facilitating good discussion of the MX discussion in December. Thank you very much once again for everybody to take part in it. Appreciate. And the webinar on MX2 is now over. Arigato. Thank you very much.